Alright. Well, time to feed the viewers on a Friday night. Yeah. Alright. They want content? Alright, I got something for them. Oh, by the way, hello viewers. Another beautiful day or night. Hope your five senses work, health and strength is good or excellent. What? Well, Linus Torvald is at it again. Listen to this. Linus Torvald clearly lays out Linux maintainer roles or not around Rust code. Says here the Linux kernel mailing list drama around the Rust programming language used within the kernel continues. Linus Torvald has largely refrained from the ongoing LKML discussion around a Rust policy for the Linux kernel, and in fighting between kernel developers and maintainers with different views over Rust. This evening, though, Linus Torvald did decide to chime in on the conversation, and he says, while there was many commentary a few days ago that Linus Torvald reportedly said that he would merge Rust kernel code over maintainer objection. In response to Christoph Hellwig, he further clarifies his position. Hellwig, with his DMA maintainer hat on, has been against the Rust code within DMA areas of the kernel. Linus Torvald respond tonight, clarifying that maintainers can either choose to take an active role with Rust binding for areas of the kernel they oversee and become involved, or have a hands-off approach where it's more complementary to their code. But kernel maintainers can't object to new Rust code as effective users of their C code. Linux kernel maintainers can either engage with any proposed Rust code or choose not to and let it live complementary within the kernel, but they can't arbitrarily block it as being a user of their code. Alright, now let's see what Linus got to say here. He says, I was hopeful, and I've tried to just see if this long thread result in anything constructive, but this seems to be going backwards, or at least not forward. The fact is, the pull request you object to did not touch the DMA layer at all. It was literally just another use of it in a complete separate subsidiary that didn't change the code you maintain in any way, shape, or form. I find it distressing that you are complaining about new users of your code, and then you keep bringing up these kind of complete garbage arguments. Says here, honestly, what you have been doing is basically saying, as a DMA maintainer, I control what the DMA code is used for, and that is not how any of this works. What's next? Saying that particular drivers can't do DMA because you don't like that device, and as a DMA maintainer, you control who can use the DMA code. That's literally exactly what you are trying to do with the Rust code. You are saying that you disagree with Rust, which is fine. Nobody has ever required you to write or read Rust code. Says there, but then you take that stance to mean that the Rust code cannot even use or interface to code you maintain. So let me be very clear. If you as a maintainer feel that you control who or what can use your code, you are wrong. I respect you technically, and I like working with you, and no, I am not looking for a yes man, and I like it when you call me out on my nonsense. I say some stupid things at times. There need to be people who just stand up to me and tell me I'm full of nonsense. Anyway, it says here, says, but now I'm calling you out on it. But now I am calling you out on yours. So this email is not about some Rust policy. This email is about a much bigger issue. As a maintainer, you are in charge of your code, sure, but you are not in charge of who uses the end result and how. You don't have to like Rust. You don't have to care about it. That's been made clear pretty much from the very beginning, that nobody is forced to suddenly have to learn a new language, and that people who want to work purely on C side can very much continue to do so. So to get back to the very core of your statement, the document claims no subsystem is forced to take Rust. That is very much true. You are not forced to take any Rust code or care about any Rust code in the DMA code. You can ignore it, but ignoring the Rust code automatically also means that you don't have any say on the Rust side. You can't have it both ways. You can't say I want to have nothing to do with Rust, and then in the very next sentence, and that means that the Rust code that I will ignore cannot use the C interface I maintain. Maintainers who want to be involved in the Rust side can be involved in it, and by involving with it, they will have some say in what the Rust binding looks like. They basically become the maintainers of the Rust interface too. But maintainers who are taking I don't want to deal with Rust option, and also then basically will obviously not have to bother with the Rust binding, but as a result they also won't have any say on what goes on the Rust side. So when you change the C interface, the Rust people will have to deal with the fallout and will have to fix the Rust binding. That's kind of the premise here. That's, I mean, there's that wall of protection around C developers that don't want to deal with Rust issues, in the premise that they don't have to deal with Rust. But that wall of protection basically goes both ways. If you don't want to deal with the Rust code, you get to say, you get no say on the Rust code. And it says here, put another way, the nobody is forced to deal with the Rust does not imply everybody is allowed to veto any Rust code. See, and no, I don't actually think it needs to be all that black and white. I've stated the above in the very black and white terms. Then it says becoming a maintainer of the Rust binding to versus don't want to deal with Rust at all. But in many cases I suspect it will be much less harsh of a line where a subsystem maintainer may be aware of the Rust binding and willing to work with the Rust side, but perhaps not hugely actively involved. So it really doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. And then it says Linus, and it says that's where things currently stands in this Rust debate for Linux kernel code. Well, like I said in the last video, you have to embrace change, be adaptable, and when it comes to learning new language, but don't leave the languages that you learn behind, just because some new language came up. I even said, like, if people want to still work on C, they still could. So Linus got a good point, about this whole Rust. I think, like they said in the comments, I think it was Shivi that said, they need to hire more developers, when it comes to dealing with Rust. Like, okay, have people that work on C programming or C++, but then have people work on Rust, and then at some point they're gonna have to meet at a crossroad, like, okay, and try to bring the two languages probably together to get something accomplished. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to learning this new language, got to be open, ready, ready to learn it. I mean, if you like your older language, okay, fine, but But don't let that stop you from learning something new. You know. Anyway, what I got here on the comments. So see what the people. So I can get a couple comments here. Who is this? CG said this. Linus is contradicting himself here. In all history of Linux development, the person to refactor an API is responsible for refactoring all of his users of it. So it's actually is very much not possible to restrict their own work to a tiny little part of a code base, except if you never change anything, of course. Now Linus says when Christian refactor something in DMA, he doesn't have to care about breaking Rust. Somebody else will fix it. That sounds nice in theory, but it's not true practically. Let's say Christian build his kernel with Rust and disable with Rust disabled. Christian refactors a part of a DMA interface, and all users except Rust of said interface in the kernel tree. Effectively, the C side is all fine and well, but the Rust side is burning now. Christian can just push this merge in Linus for release, because Linus builds with Rust enabled, so he will throw things at Christian for breaking the build. So I don't really see how what Linus described here as absolute problem free. It's supposed to work in practice. Christian cannot just care about the Rust users of his interface, and that is exactly what Christian sees as a problem with a dual language. When not everybody is fluent in both, Christian may not have had the right to knack the MR, but I very much understand where he's coming from. Yep, like I said, you got to be adjustable, adaptable to change. But it doesn't mean you leave the old languages behind just because something new comes out. Yeah, you know, you might need to still use those older language, you know, but you got to be open to, you know, to the new ones, you know. Yeah, to keep up with technology. If you get the point. Here's another one. Who's this? Spifo said this. He is just treating the language situation differently as covered by policy. And then he says that is why Linux integration branches like Linux Next exist. Anyway, and then Drally said this. I'm glad this was finally and publicly made clear. It would have been better to have it done in 2 weeks ago, and would probably have avoided an awful lot of fallouts had that been the case. That is quite unfortunate, but it's still glad the position is official now. And who's this? Erniv said this. Wow, that came over pretty clear. Also, I don't see much fallout here. I don't know how the DMA API really works, but if Rust just calls function DMA blah blah, nothing will break. It will only break if someone rename it to function DMA blub blub. but we will probably see new maintainers step up to do Rust code anyway sometimes soon, since DMA and IOMMU are security and performance critical parts. And then when the Nova people starts to apply their patches, we will see some movement there, I guess. And then who's this? Isaac said this. Just remove Rust from the kernel already. Call it a failed experiment. It has created nothing but unnecessary drama. Who was this? CB said this. Shush. Then Batch Chain said, I don't know how many times this has to be repeated, but the expectation from day one has been that when a C API just Rust use changes and breaks Rust code, it's acceptable for it to maintain broken until a member of the RFL team themselves fixes it. And let's see who else we got here. Let's see who is this? And then BLK said this, but of course he's responding to he said yes, but of course that will have to change at least when significant part of Linux will depend on Rust features. Unless Rust is strictly limited, that seems rather inevitable. And of course the ride will have bumps, but then again, that's the price of moving targets. Where where there's a will, there's a way. Well, look, that's all the comments I'm gonna read. They got 10 pages of comments, but I mean, when it comes to learning new languages, I mean, it's good to learn them. See what his strengths and weaknesses are, but you don't leave your old languages behind though just because something new come out. Especially in programming, because you might need it down, like I said, down the road. And I think when it comes to learning new languages, like, okay, how does Rust interact with C, C++, Java, and all that? So I think that's what these developers, should try to figure out, and figure out what's the benefit of using both languages, and what's the shortcomings, So yeah, that's my thoughts on this whole little drama. But Linus has spoken, and the judgment has been decided. Anyway, I'm gonna leave this video for y'all to enjoy it. Nice talking to you people again. Chris, those Star Wars Star Trek thing. Board, section. Go. Peace. Oh.